morning. Hello. It's so nice to see all these new faces out in the audience. Hopefully everybody is learning, sharing, networking, gaining tons of knowledge to take back to your companies. So welcome to a topic that keeps me up at night, talking about value, capital outlay, and trying to get the best return for our investments. So today, I am joined by two new LinkedIn friends and Deloitte colleagues, Jenny Lindsay and Gab Ritchie. Jenny is a Senior Vice President at Commerce Bank over data and analytics, and Gab is a Chief Data and Technology Officer at Takeda Pharmaceutical Company. All right, are you guys ready?
Ready.
Ready. Okay, so first question. Where have you seen AI deliver the clearest ROI in your organization to date? So it could be cost savings, it could be productivity gains, or areas that you have not expected.
I can start maybe.
Sure.
Productivity gain, I think, is the easy one. For example, in our financial organization, we have an agent for forecasting. And now we are able actually to make forecasting with slightly more precision, so we move from 97% to 98%. It doesn't sound great, but we can run a forecast now in 20 minutes rather than 3 months. So this is, a clear example of personal productivity, right? Another one is the HR digital partners. So we just deployed an agent across 15 countries, 15,000 people in Takeda. And this is actually helping all our colleagues to access HR information. But on the other side of the fence, the HR professional can access a similar agent that actually manage more confidential information, because those are, HR professional people. And actually now they can close, a job change, for example, in 60% less time. So those are clear examples of personal productivity. But on the other side, we have also, something more tangible, linked to savings, basically. For example, in research, we have a medical literature agent that scans scientific papers and rank all these scientific papers by relevance. Normally, this is a task that we, let's say, delegate on third parties. And so we can do that now faster internally, so we save millions, basically, in savings. One area that was a little bit of a surprise for me was when we launched our internal companion that is called MyAibo. Aibo in Japanese means companion, so we use a Japanese name for everything because we are a Japanese company. And we saw an incredible adoption once that we enter into the performance management phase, right, in Takeda. So we saw basic adoption moving from 4,000 people to 15,000 users in a week, because they figured out how to use these agents for performance management, to collect feedback, to align feedback to our leadership behaviors. And we didn't train these 10,000 people, so they figured out quickly, how to use that. And now the biggest platform in Takeda is not our ERP, is not our CRM, is this companion app that is used by 60% of the entire population. So it's changing completely, how we run technology in the company.
Okay, so I have to ask you a follow-up question. How long did you all debate what the potential value could be from these investments? Just curious.
In terms of how quickly we got investment. So we're trying to prioritize investment where we can have 2.5, 3 folds of the initial investment. This is actually a threshold that we use to constantly prioritize investment across the enterprise. So we maintain a portfolio of investment. It's not just on AI, it's across the board. And we have a governance that is part of the enterprise governance, basically, to constantly prioritize investment. And this 2.53% is a threshold that is used to accelerate investment on AI agents.
Okay, great, thank you. Jenny?
Yeah, sure. I love hearing all of that. We're in a very different spot here at Commerce Bank, and AI is such a broad term. I feel like a lot of people say AI and they mean Gen AI, but for us, the most clear-cut ROI is really traditional AI. So when we're talking about machine learning and neural networks, and I can tell you a lot of cost savings metrics, right? So our cost to acquire accounts is 80% less using machine learning, millions of dollars in fraud losses that we've mitigated from our machine learning models. But Gen AI is a little bit of a different story for us. And the panel before talked about financial services and it's largely clean data. Well, we are not in that boat. We have a lot of siloed systems. We're a 160-year-old bank, and as you can imagine, there's a lot of siloed systems, and we're in the middle of a modernization effort. And so when we think about things like Copilot, sure, everybody has it. But how do you measure an ROI on something like that? You know, and yesterday in our breakout, somebody was talking about, well, it's $340. Everyone can surely get $340 of value out of it. But when you multiply that times 4,000 people, that's over $1 million. And so is there $1 million worth of savings by utilizing those? So I think next steps for us is really trying to figure out how do we measure Gen AI? And that starts with how do you want to measure that in the beginning? I think going back after the fact, it's pretty tough to measure something after it's been going for a while. So what is your goal in trying to get in front of that? So a little bit different place here for us.
So I have a follow-up question for you, Jenny. So do you have a team that is helping kind of identify what the value bet should be? A governance framework? I liked, Gab, how you said the thresholds. Do you all have a similar framework that you're using?
Right. So I would call us immature in our framework.
Great.
But really,
thank you for being honest.
Yeah, really working towards that though. So we do have an enterprise data and AI steering committee, but it just started this first quarter. We didn't have an AI strategy, so we just introduced that and approved an AI strategy this year. Part of that was developing a working group to develop our process around how do we want to evaluate AI use case, because we know AI is already happening. So we're trying to put a tent over that circus that's already going on out there. There's a lot of shadow AI things going on. Everyone's getting hit up by their vendors that they've got an AI add-on, and some people are just doing that. So we got to get our arms around that. But we developed a process and some due diligence. And so I still think we're even figuring out what are the risks we should be looking at. And so we've started that. Most of the use cases coming through are low. We have a few mediums, not a lot of high. I don't know that our legal department's ready for the customer facing, so that's why I say that. So yes, we do have processes in place, and we're still kind of refining those.
Oh, I love that.
You know, this personal productivity discussion, at least in Takeda, became also an ethical discussion, because we had actually this conversation about if you have some tools that increase your productivity and I can access these tools in the same way, that could become a big problem in some countries. And so, you know, the ethical access to personal productivity tools, it's something very relevant for us and is becoming, you know, very important for managing our workforce.
Maybe you could tell us, Gab, as a side note, the AI ethical framework that your team stood up, was that in response to the ethical analysis?
So we are a 244 years old company, and we exist because we have very strong values that we bring with us since, you know, we have founded. And our value framework is based on patient trust, reputation, and business in that specific order. Every time we make a decision in Takeda, we ask, okay, is it okay for this decision for the patients? What about the trust on the community that we serve? What about the reputation of our brand? And ultimately, is economically sustainable. Before we launched our Gen AI program, we felt the need actually to create a guardrails around which experiment with Gen AI, because we needed to adapt our legal posture, our ethics and compliance posture, and that helped us actually to embrace those principles in all data and AI solutions. And it's about transparency, it's about auditability. We are working both in a very regulated environment, so we need to be conscious for us, for example, in terms of fairness and bias management. If we build early diagnostic tools for rare conditions, for example, is it okay to use the same, let's say, algorithms trained on Western data in Asia, right? Those are all ethical considerations that we need to ask ourselves, and there are no best practices. You need to learn. So I'm very happy that we created not just a trustworthy AI, let's say, framework, but actually we created an entire team focused on digital ethics and compliance. And those are a little bit the sentinel to ensure that our values are not put at risk, right? Specifically trust and reputation.
Wow, I love that. Okay, second question. How do you measure the effectiveness of AI initiatives beyond the traditional return? Well, I guess we just kind of talked about that. Anything else to add?
This is part of our digital transformation. We thought about creating a simple way to measure value in general. For us, value has 3 dimensions. It's about be better, faster, more efficient. This is the motto that we use, so that everybody understands, right? More efficient is easier. It's basically cost efficiency. But better and faster are equally important, specifically in R&D, for example, how we can squeeze the timeline, right, of our clinical trials. So if you can do something faster, is basically more important than be more efficient, because we can bring medicines to patients faster than ever. But also quality is very important. So we were trying to manage this prioritization framework that I mentioned before, using these 3 levers, and asking to all projects to look into these KPIs. Quality, speed, and cost efficiency.
I like that. That's simple. I could remember that. Okay, thank you. All right, Jenny, I've got a good one for you. So, you talked that you're on a different journey. You're just starting with Gen AI, but you've been doing AI and automation for a long time. Can you share a lesson learned from an AI investment that you did not deliver the anticipated value, and what you changed afterwards?
Yeah, so one of the things that we wanted to do was develop a model to detect fraud. Now, we're detecting fraud using our card processors tools, but we thought, well, we know our customers better than anybody else. And so we're gonna go develop something that, is built off of, the fraud that we're already seeing, and it's gonna be great. Internally, we're gonna get more fraud losses than we're seeing now. And unfortunately, we were not able to get the false positives to a rate that was acceptable by the business. And what I would say is we were probably 3 or 4 years in before we realized that, because this started as like a hackathon project, and this was one of the first real-time initiatives that we really wanted to do. Secondly, how are we gonna hook into our card processors process? The Capital Ones and JP Morgans can pay the millions of dollars to insert their stuff into those processes. Commerce Bank would not probably be able to do that. And so we did decide to kill that, but then our processor came to us and said, well, look, we have some AI processes that we think could help you. And we were able, so I'm gonna turn this into a success, because we were able to see that they could get lower false positives as compared to ours, which makes a lot of sense. They have a much bigger population of fraud that they're looking for, and in the end, they can insert that right into the transaction process, and something we didn't need to figure out at Commerce. So I think we really were able to take that. This was kind of our first cloud AI, and it was really sad, and we were all very sad about it, but I think in the end, we ended up something that was a better solution for the company by going external, and the better customer experience.
I love that. Thank you.
Well, we failed miserably when you have a very nice pilot, maybe in one country, and then you trying to scale across the 80 countries that we have. And in some areas, there's a lot of policies, and those policies are changing very rapidly. Also here in the US, every state now is coming up with something different. So adapting is complicated, and so you have an idea to build an enterprise capabilities, actually the ability to scale is very limited. So sometimes we decided, okay, let's step back and buy something out of the box that can scale faster than us.
And then the investment in the talent,
Exactly.
investment
To
in the
maintain
talent,
it,
and then, to maintain that and upskill and constantly kind of refresh that too at the same
Exactly.
time. Okay.
I actually have one more to add to that, which is more relevant to Gen AI. We had a Gen AI hackathon back in March, and the winner was a group that said, oh, we're gonna be able to tell if a check image is fraudulent or not. And they were using a neural network, but there were no data scientists on the team. And so I'm like, oh, that's interesting. How did you build that? Well, we did machine learning, and we built the neural network. And I was like, oh, interesting. So what did you find? Oh, well, we found all this fraud, and at scale, it's gonna be millions of dollars of savings. But unfortunately, they were using, and I'm going to get real nerdy here, a biased sample. So they had downsampled. And then when you apply that to the organization, it definitely wasn't as great. So I would say we're seeing that where it's like, oh my gosh, everybody can build these models. And I'm like, you can, but that doesn't mean they're going to work. And so, and I don't know if anyone else has experience with that, but I think at the top level, it's like we're excited because everyone can go out and now do AI, and we may not need data scientists anymore. But in that instance, it didn't work well. And then once we tried to apply it to the unbiased sample, it didn't work. So I think thinking through that and what are the guardrails around how we develop those types of things.
Thank you, guys. Okay. Okay, here's a good one. Looking ahead, what emerging AI capabilities do you believe will redefine the ROI equation for your businesses over the next 2 to 3 years?
I think in Takeda 5 years ago, we moved into cloud economy, and then from cloud into a platform product economy. So we basically reimagine our data and digital technology P&L on platform and processes. Platforms and products. Now we are moving into a process economy, where we are redesigning processes ground up, where basically agents are at the center with humans in the loop or on the loop. But then we required actually to manage a P&L at process level, because we want to ensure that we capture the full of the cost of humans in the process. We capture the cost of agents, and this is very complicated area. Actually, we had a discussion yesterday in our breakout session, and we create new capabilities to constantly optimize this process over time. That we require basically changing our cloud FinOps team into a process FinOps team, for example, or to have a continuous improvement team taking advantage of our Six Sigma and lean manufacturing capabilities in the global supply chain to really constantly optimize, the process. So it's really about changing completely how we redesign ground up the organization, and more importantly, how you redesign all teams around these global capabilities, because the organization must be rewired. So it's a seismic shift. It's not something anymore that you patch here and there, but you need to force the organization to adopt enterprise capabilities, and that's complicated.
Well, and just listening too with M&A. So now M&A, the market's hot, and there's a lot of activity. Yep. And so if you're building and designing brand new processes, thinking about, okay, how will new companies get added in, divestitures, it changes the whole conversation about transformation and integration. Yeah,
absolutely.
From a perspective. Okay, Jenny.
Yeah, so I think for us, we are, I'm going to say data, right? Getting our data in a place to where we can do Gen AI effectively. And we're doing a transformation. So we're currently still in an on-prem, more batch-oriented system, and migrating to the cloud, actually moving to Databricks, where they have things that you can develop LLMs using their platform. But we have to get our data in a place where we can do those things. I actually went to the Databricks Summit, and they're like, oh, are you going to all the AI things? I said, no, I'm going to the governance. Because without good data and without good processes to make sure that you know it's accurate, I'm not really even ready to go there. We're not even ready as an organization to go there. So unfortunately, it's that non-sexy part that we have to do to get our things in order to be able to go to that level. So for us, it's focusing on those things and going kind of through this transformation before we can kind of get there.
And go ahead.
This is a very important, governance is so important. We decided, for example, to adopt just 6 platforms for agentic AI. First of all, because we don't have capabilities on everything. Secondly, because it's very expensive. And I think, companies like us will be successful if they can orchestrate and govern all these agents well. Because yes, we can build our agents and we can be our agents fast, but actually accessing some platforms. Now I can have out of the box hundreds of agents. Hundreds of agents, and some of them are completely overlapping in capabilities. So understand which agent we want to use where, and control and govern that at enterprise level is critical for costs, but also for risks, right?
Yeah, and in the conversation yesterday on the Box CEO, I had learned something new about the agents have a job description
Yeah.
of what they're responsible for and what the tasks are, and just kind of understanding too. What I worry about is just the orchestration of all of the agents and kind of how they all kind of come together and from a governance perspective.
And this is a big gap that we have across all industries about this orchestration, and if you figure out, happy to share some learnings, but that's very complicated.
And the previous panel got my attention when they mentioned AI for mainframes. So there's job security out there for those of us that worked on mainframes. Okay, two more questions for you guys. Okay, one is, how do you balance the internal tension with the external pressure around ROI, or is there a balance?
Yes,
hard one.
there's tension because, let's say, externally our investors are constantly looking to how much we're investing on data and digital, what's the impact on the core operating profit. And actually our investments are very visible because they are separated in the P&L. If you look into the P&L of Takeda, you have R&D, COGS, G&A, R&D, and data, digital, and technology. This is a decision that we made because we have an ambition to become a digital biopharmaceutical company, and so we wanted to reflect this ambition in our P&L to show the value. But now we are scrutinized and say, how much you're investing compared to R&D or other parts. So there's always this tension.
Okay.
But I also believe that internally we can use just efficiency, as I mentioned before, as a metrics for value generation. Okay. Again, quality and speed are equally important for us. So yeah, we are maintaining this, trying to balance this tension, but the reality is that all our investors are very focused on efficiency.
Okay, got it. Thank you.
Yeah, so honestly, I think our executive management thinks that we are way behind the ball, and so we need to speed up. We need to be doing more. Everyone's ahead of us. When I come to things like these, and it's like, we're really not. A lot of people are in a very similar boat. So for us, it's been a lot of communication about what we are doing with AI. We've been doing it for 20 years. But if you're talking about Gen AI, we're just dipping our toe in there. So I've actually been on an education campaign around the company, and recently at our fall management conference, to talk about, we've been using AI, and AI is more than just chatbots. And so that's kind of like my message, even though I'm the AI champion. I'm like, look, we have been doing it, and here's some things we are doing to dip our toe in, and we're on the verge of this pretty big transformation. But this year, we develop a strategy, we have a steering committee, now we have a working group, we have due diligence, we're getting our data in order, and so there is things coming, and I think just sharing that message, that campaign around what we are doing has kind of quieted that noise just a little bit, like, oh yeah, we are doing things in this space, and we're never going to be on the bleeding edge of AI. So honestly, seeing the hype cycle come down and expectations and reality kind of converging and watching some of the bigger players and where they're having success is key for us.
Okay, so I have an interesting question, a Deloitte question actually. So one of the things we're struggling with, and particularly on capabilities and where the value is on capabilities, is our recruiting strategy. So just curious, have you changed the thinking on where you're recruiting from, what you're recruiting? Just interested.
Yeah, so when we started our digital transformation 3 years ago, 80% of our workforce was externalized. And we're saying, if you want to be a 3-star Michelin chef, you don't outsource your kitchen, at least not completely.
I love that.
So we started actually thinking about, okay, what capabilities we need to have in-house to enable the next phase of business growth. And that's the reason why we opened a few innovation centers. We opened a center in Bratislava, in Mexico City, Bengaluru, Chengdu, Tokyo. And we have now thousands of engineers that join the organization. So we needed to rethink about that because we operate primarily in very high-cost locations like Tokyo, Zurich, Boston. It's not sustainable in long term, especially if you need talents at scale. So we needed to reimagine that. But now we have another problem. And the problem is that we have 4 generations working at Takeda together.
Oh.
And for the first time, if you think about the next 3 years, I think all of us will have the first AI native generations, right? For sure, Gen Z, but very soon also Gen Alpha. And that will be the generations that will be mostly impacted by agentic AI, because there are junior roles. And I think we have also a duty, if you want, to create a runway for all these generations to find their own way to enter in the work. Because otherwise they will just have the residue of this transformation. So I think as leaders, we need to carefully think about the generations gap. It's not just a digital divide, it's actually enable a generational transformation.
Wow.
The future of workforce, at least for Takeda, will change completely in the next 3-5 years. And I think we need to start thinking this very carefully.
I love that. Job security. I love it. Thank you. Well, thank you guys. This was fun. Perfect timing. I love it. I appreciate your time today for being very honest and vulnerable in this discussion.
Thanks for
Thank you so
having
much.
me.
Thank you.